It is now my pleasure to introduce Jim Ogsbury, Executive Director of the Western Governors Association, which represents the governors of 19 Western states and 3 Pacific territories. Jim has over 20 years of experience in creating and implementing bipartisan public policy. Since his arrival at WGA, Jim has overseen various initiatives, including reimagining the Rural West and the Western Governors National Forest and Rangeland Management Initiative. Jim, thank you for your participation in the symposium this year. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Jocelyn. It's an honor to participate in this year's Water in the West Symposium. I understand that the symposium has traditionally focused on collaborative solutions to water challenges in the West, and that the 2020 symposium is further designed to inspire action. In those respects, you are speaking the language of the Western Governors Association. WGA is a fiercely bipartisan organization representing the governors of the 22 westernmost states and territories. We are a member services association and operate multiple functions to support our governors. But our bread and butter is the development of bipartisan public policy to benefit our region and our nation. I've spent my entire career in and around policy and politics, and I can tell you that Western governors are easily the most collegial, collaborative, and productive group of elected officials for whom I've ever had the pleasure to work. They are singularly focused on action and getting things done. In fact, no other group of elected officials at their level of influence are, on a bipartisan basis, effectively producing and pursuing policy that is as substantive and significant as that being advanced by Western governors. Western governors have detailed policy resolutions on a wide range of issues affecting the West, including trade, broadband, healthcare, agriculture, rural development, energy, wildfire, invasive and endangered species, cybersecurity, workforce development, infrastructure, and many more. But of all the issues on which WGA works, few are of such enduring and collective interest as water. WGA is a historic leader in Western water policy, which is primarily articulated in 2 WGA policy resolutions: water resource management in the West and water quality in the West. These are detailed and thoughtful expressions of gubernatorial water policy, and they are notable for their aggressive defense and promotion of states' primary authority over water management, allocation, planning, and protection. They also promote stronger partnerships between states and federal agencies in the implementation of federal water statutes, such as the Clean Water Act and Safe Drinking Water Act, and in the development of critical water infrastructure. To more fully examine water issues, I am honored to have the opportunity today to visit with Western governors who work on the front lines to develop and implement sensible water policy for our region. We are so honored that the Honorable Mark Gordon, the governor of the great state of Wyoming, is available to join us this year for the Water in the West Symposium, hosted by Colorado State University. Of course, the main campus of CSU is in Fort Collins, just down the road from Cheyenne in South Wyoming. Governor Gordon is a tremendous leader and a great natural asset, not just for the cowboy state, but for the entire West. He richly reflects WGA's bipartisan ethos, and he understands the importance of collaboration and cooperation across party lines, across state lines, across ideological divides. Governor Gordon is a rancher and small businessman who served as Wyoming State Treasurer before becoming Wyoming's 33rd governor. Growing up on the family ranch in Johnson County, he learned the value of hard work, integrity, and the importance of finishing what you start. The governor and his wife continue to ranch in Johnson County and remain active in their community, doing more than their fair share to protect Wyoming's incredible natural environment and to promote the prosperity of its residents. Governor, thank you so much for joining me for this conversation about water in the West.
Well, thanks, Jim. It's an honor to be here, and I'm really happy to have Governor Sisolak and Governor Polis also involved in this. My daughter, Bee, is at the University of Nevada in Reno getting her PhD in hydrology even as we speak. So I feel a little bit of a connection there as well. But, you know, water, what an important topic for the West. Obviously, Wyoming, we feel a particular affinity for the fact that we're a headwater state for three of the nation's major tributaries, the Missouri, the Colorado, and the Columbia. And each has its own particular issues, but I think it's important as we talk about the stage that we do understand that what you do in one state matters in another state, and we have to collaborate and work together. So commend you for pulling this together. Thank you.
Well, we often hear that states are the laboratories of democracy, and we know that governors lead the way in designing cooperative solutions to state and regional and national challenges. They are a principal source of policy innovation and creative initiatives. Could you tell us a little about the state of water and water policy in Wyoming? What are your policy priorities regarding water? And are there innovations or developments that are reshaping water usage in Wyoming?
Well, I think thank you for that. I think there are a number of issues that are particularly at a kind of a very important juncture for us now. Obviously, as we look at the Colorado and the challenges we see there, being able to make sure that each state can control its own water and how it develops it, but understand also that in the context of the Colorado anyway, that we do have a interstate compact that really is an important feature to how we manage water throughout the West. We are currently working to make sure that Wyoming has access and the ability to use its water, but we're very mindful of what happens in our neighboring states of Utah, Colorado, and even downstream to California and Arizona, of course. One of the most crucial elements that I think we look at and I've often thought about is so much of our irrigation infrastructure is a century old or better. And last year we saw the collapse of a tunnel on one of our most important irrigation districts. And the Goshen Irrigation District, which also goes into Nebraska, over 100,000 acres of farmland was impacted by that. The cost of restructuring and sort of redesigning and redoing that particular tunnel was enormous. And so we worked with Nebraska to try to discover a way that we could address this issue, working with actually farmers and along the whole path. What we did in Wyoming, which I think could be a kind of a focus for the future, is that Wyoming's established a new fund that allows farmers and ranchers to be able to put in kind of an insurance approach, but to be augmented as necessary with state funding to meet the demands of this. And as we look at irrigation infrastructure really right across all of Wyoming, from the Northwest down through the Platte River system, we can see that there are dam structures, there are headwater structures, headgate structures, ditch and canal structures, all of which need a lot of attention. So we've worked carefully with Congress to try to make sure that we get the funding available to refurbish all of that. And really, my daughters work in California, where in the Central Valley we have subsidence coming from drought conditions. This is an incredibly important area that we're going to have to work on really throughout the West.
Well, what are some of the national priorities, issues that Washington, D.C. needs to address that would help Wyoming and the West?
Well, obviously, one of the most important things, I think, is the Water Resources Development Act of 2020, which I think will provide much of the funding to be able to address some of those infrastructure needs that we talked about. But beyond that, I think also putting a little bit more attention to the smaller developments. We know that massive infrastructure dams, those are going to be harder and harder to build, and yet we need to be able to do a better job of being able to control and maintain the waters that we have. Another issue on a national stage, and I think it's this year probably more pronounced than almost any other time, has been what do we do with forest health and water management? Colorado had a number of fires. I know I talked with Governor Polis several times during the summer. We had our own, the Mullen Fire, Mullen Creek Fire, which was 175,000 acres, the second largest, either the second or largest fire in our history. And then having toured it afterwards, and you see, slopes that have been completely burned out, soils that have been sterilized, the challenges of having runoff, what that does with silt loading, what that does for wildlife, what that does for water quality, what that does for municipal watersheds. We can just do a better job with forest management.
Are there other policy initiatives in Wyoming that have either been enacted or are under consideration or development that you'd like to discuss?
Well, as I did mention, we're looking at ways that we can get farmers and ranchers to participate in protecting their own infrastructure. We've looked at, and this is actually a little bit of a national stage, but it's a state initiative. We believe very strongly that the Section 401 permitting issue has to be something that states have absolute priority on. The water quality within our state, that is an essential states' right. But where that is extended beyond the boundaries to try to impact the way other states develop their infrastructure, those things, we find a little bit of cause for concern. It's something we look forward to working with our other Western governors, because what's in our state boundaries is absolutely essential, but I don't think any of us want one state to completely impact the economic outlook of another state.
Well, on that point, WGA water policy is all about protecting state authority over water and water resources. Do you feel comfortable that Wyoming has sufficient expertise and capacity and experience to effectively manage the water resources within its boundaries? And if so, how should states relate to the federal government with respect to water and environmental policy? What does an effective partnership look like?
Well, I do think that Wyoming has put a lot of effort into our management of water resources. I served on our state before at this capacity. I served on our state's Environmental Quality Council, which is the sort of the hearing board and rulemaking board. And we looked very carefully on a regular basis at how rules would be implemented, the ways we could protect water supplies and systems. And I feel very confident in our state's technical ability to meet those challenges. I think that the partnership with the federal government is one where there really has to be respect for states' rights. But as I say, as we look at these, as we look at how one state's implementation of regulations can apply across across boundaries, we need to recognize that's where the federal government can come in and help coordinate that policy. I think that's a little bit of what Senator Barrasso's 401 reform is really looking at. I think that's a positive step in the right direction to really talk about that important aspect of states' rights, but matching a national policy.
So I'm originally from Arizona, where it's so dry that the trees chase after the dogs. But drought is a problem for the entire region. How has drought impacted Wyoming, and is the state actively pursuing drought mitigation policies?
Drought is something that the West is coming to have to deal with on a much more regular basis. This year, for example, not only have we had the impacts related to COVID, but we've had almost unprecedented drought conditions. I think where Wyoming is looking is what are the things that we can do with storage to be able to provide for irrigation, what are water supply forecasting how do we look at the changes that that are going through climate right now to understand a better way to manage our resources. There are some wonderful models out there that are predicting less snow in the mountains with a faster runoff, with more predictable rain kind of going through the year. And this, I think, will shape how the West looks at policy and how we look at management of water supply. So I think that is something that we're spending a lot of time in: new remote sensing, other imaging capabilities, better modeling techniques, and then trying to supplement those with on-the-ground measurement systems. A lot of automation has gone into our weather reporting and our stream gauge reporting as well.
You earlier acknowledged the catastrophic wildfire season that the West has suffered in 2020. And of course, wildfire has enormous impacts on water and water supplies and water quality. And you mentioned the Mullen Fire. Can you talk a little bit more about the fire season and any additional lessons that you may have learned from this experience?
Yeah, thank you for that, Jim. I do think that it is a bit of a wake-up call. I think for a lot of our recent history, there has been a view, let's put a lot of fire suppression in place. Then that was sort of relaxed with let's allow some more natural fires to occur. And then there was, I think on the point of timber management, there was kind of a let go and let God kind of aspect. As I flew over the Mullen Creek fire, it was really evident that where we had regenerated growth versus old dead trees, we were able to get a little bit ahead of the fire in the regen, whereas the beetle kill really was uncontrollable. And luckily, we had some weather incidents that helped contain some of the more devastating aspects of that. But I think as we look at it, and really you look at the northern Colorado and Wyoming experience, there's a lot of data to support better forest management. And if we look at it in an overall climate solution, a growing and green forest is a better way to sequester carbon than a dead and decaying or burning forest. And so I think there are some real opportunities there to manage watershed better, to be able to build a better mosaic for fire control. And we ought to put some more resources into that so that we aren't just on our back foot all the time trying to figure out how to deploy resources for whatever massive fire we see.
COVID-19 has turned the world upside down, and governors have been at the point of the spear, focused on containing the virus and mitigating impacts and keeping supply chains open and building healthcare capacities. And yet, the rest of their responsibilities did not magically disappear. Can you talk a little about the challenges of managing priorities in the context of a global pandemic?
Well, it is certainly a challenge. There is no question. I think for Wyoming and much of the West this year, we saw COVID arrive, but didn't really manifest itself as dramatically as it is currently. That was a bit of a good thing for Wyoming in that it allowed us to be able to provide the outdoor experience that was good for a lot of people to get away from where they might be exposed and out into the country to appreciate some of the great landscape, the parks that we have, et cetera. But as we've seen COVID really rear its head in Montana and Wyoming and North and South Dakota and Idaho, the challenge of trying to make sure that we still have a direction forward on energy, on water policy, on economic development, it becomes much more acute. And so really it's been another couple of layers I guess, consideration and responsibility as we go forward. I have no doubt that with the advent of a virus, we were going to see the challenges we do. Now, I think with a vaccine coming on board, we see maybe a little bit of a light at the end of the tunnel. And so from our standpoint, it is about getting our people to appreciate there is light at the end of the tunnel, and we have to knuckle down a little bit before we get there, but that there is a happy world on the other end.
You spoke earlier about infrastructure, and I think it's generally understood that we have a significant national problem with deteriorating infrastructure, and that's especially true with respect to water systems. Many dams are being operated beyond their expected life, and older water supply facilities pose health risks and are subject to failure. Do you have any additional insights about the state of infrastructure in Wyoming and the extent to which that's an issue of concern?
Well, I think we've gone through a period of trying to maintain, and now we need to restore much of that infrastructure. I think that will be good for production agriculture. All in all, I think it's good for water in the West. It is more expensive now than it ever has been, and I think we need to have that commitment.
Well, Governor, you've been very generous with your time and your leadership, and I want to thank you for participating and for your great insights today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you, Governor Gordon, for that great conversation. My name is Ward Scott. I'm a policy advisor with the Western Governors Association. I'll be conducting the next two interviews on behalf of Jim Ogsberry. Next, I'm honored to be joined by Governor Stephen Rowe Lewis of the Gila River Indian Community. Governor Lewis was raised on the Gila River Indian Community and served as lieutenant governor before being elected governor in 2014. Governor Lewis has prioritized two critical areas for his administration: the expansion of services for community veterans and committing resources to protect the community's children. Governor Lewis graduated from Arizona State University with a bachelor's in science and pursued graduate studies at the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. Governor Lewis, you're a leader in a number of water conversations that impact the Gila River Indian community. Can you share some thoughts about your priorities for the community in the upcoming year, particularly with respect to water issues?
So there are always pressing priorities, but if I had to pick three, the first would be engaging in the reconsultation discussions in Arizona concerning the new Colorado River guidelines. You know, these conversations are starting in all the basin states, and I anticipate that next year these discussions will become more intense. So I also anticipate starting the government-to-government tribal consultation process with the Bureau of Reclamation next year as well. Secondly, implementing the first phase of the takeover of the canal system that's currently being managed by the BIA. You know, currently the BIA manages a portion of the on-reservation system, and the community manages the other portion. So we have three projects that we're integrating to manage all of the systems to bring it under control. And that's really exercising our sovereignty and our self-governance as well. And lastly, the continued rehabilitation and construction of our irrigation infrastructure, which also include groundwater recharge facilities. We're relying more and more on underground water for on-reservation irrigation, but we want to ensure that we are not overstressing the supply. And so we are using some of our Colorado River supplies, our allocation for this recharge. Once the project is done, we expect to recharge between 60 to 70,000 acre feet per year. And in a nutshell, those are probably our most pressing issues.
Great. Well, Governor, a theme for this year's symposium is how the power of storytelling can help engage more people in conversations and actions around water. Could you reflect on the important role of storytelling in your work in general and particularly regarding water issues?
Well, thank you. Storytelling is very important. Growing up on the Gila River Indian community, where storytelling is an important part of our history, our culture, and tradition. The Gila River Indian community's story revolves around water, what we call our shuduk, our water in our language. Historically, we were very successful agriculturalists, farmers in central Arizona, which is present day the Phoenix area. Our culture and economy revolved around irrigated farming. We were very successful until our water was stolen. After the Civil War, when Anglo farmers started settling in Arizona and diverting the water from upstream of the Gila River, we call Arkudi Akama. The result of that theft was that a once prosperous, independent, and self-sufficient people suddenly had our livelihood literally taken from us overnight. We became dependent on the federal government and even suffered severe famine that threatened our very existence. And this was around the turn of the past century. So our history was important in getting our water rights back. My father, the late Rodney Lewis, who was our community's first attorney, and he devoted his whole legal career to fighting this historic battle for regaining our water rights. And this, again, culminated in the Arizona Water Settlement Act of 2004. And so I take that as a personal legacy that now as governor, I'm governor-elect in my third term, I take this as a personal responsibility of people like my father and like our past leaders, and going back to our ancestors and who we connect ourselves to the Hugam civilization of central Arizona that built and engineered incredible water management infrastructure, canal systems that are still, that blueprint is still being used today of these canal systems that were built thousands of years ago. So our history is very important in communicating that now to our next generation of community members who will be taking over and running our water delivery system, managing, overseeing our water rights and protecting them. So storytelling is very important. Our story is also important in providing an important context on how we manage our water resources today and actions we take to protect our water history for the future. So our goal is to ensure as much as we can that our water rights will never be taken from us again, and that the restoration of our traditional agricultural culture will last in perpetuity.
Thank you for that answer. That was very insightful and very interesting. I want to know, as governor, what national water priorities and issues would you like to see receive more attention in the near future?
Well, water, it's always a pressing, critical issue in the arid West. But with population growth, the continuation of large-scale farming, and climate change, this resource is under more strain than it's ever have been. There remains a significant amount of unresolved tribal water rights claims from our sister tribes, our fellow tribes throughout Arizona, throughout the Southwest, throughout Indian country. And I think it's in everyone's interest, especially in the West, to have a significant amount of federal funding to help resolve these claims once and for all. The lack of financial resources is really, from a policy making perspective, is really what holds up most of these tribal water settlements. And most of what tribes need is infrastructure for clean water supplies. Given the current pandemic, COVID-19, and the need for our economy to recover from this pandemic, I strongly recommend including a large amount of funding, an historic amount of funding for tribal water settlements in any future or current infrastructure recovery legislation, to me, that makes common sense with what the reality that we're all dealing with now, especially tribes without water settlements or those still trying to implement water settlements. I also think that for tribes that have already resolved water claims, such as the Gila River Indian community, funding and policy decisions that strongly support conservation measures should also be a priority as well in Congress, in the next administration. So more financial resources for conservation efforts make perfect sense at this time. But there are also management tools like enabling water storage in Colorado River reservoirs, such as Lake Mead, that encourages storage and also has a conservation benefit as well, and reduces the chance of severe water shortages that will affect Indian tribes, that will affect cities and other jurisdictions. It will affect all of us. So I think those types of long-range, important planning policy decisions should be supported. You know, as the Gila River Indian community, we know full well, going back to our story of when water is taken away from us, when we are pushed to the brink of extinction. We know how that is. That's in our blood. That's in our DNA. That's in our stories. And we don't want that to happen to anyone. Now, we know full well, coming from that and learning from our history, that we don't want to repeat those same mistakes moving forward. We feel that we, as caretakers of our water, of our natural resources, of stewards, that we have a moral obligation to be the ones that make those important decisions that protect water, that conserve water, that we can be examples to other tribes, to other jurisdictions, to other states across the United States, across the world, to show good water management, sound water management policies and decisions, and to be that good example on into the future.
Great, thank you. You know, you've talked about some very large scale efforts that require multiple parties coming together and collaborating and working in partnership, including Indian water rights settlements. And I know you were certainly played a major role in the Colorado River Drought Contingency Plan over the last few years, and just wondering if you had thoughts about what made for successful partnerships in those efforts, and what other tribes and state and federal water leaders might be able to learn from your experiences.
When you have the states and the federal government, you know, making these important policy decisions, it's important that tribes are at the table. You know, we bring very innovative solutions, especially at times when we have such a diverse group of stakeholders. And tribes are innovative and resilient. That's also part of our story as well, and part of our story of survival. And so we were able to actually build and form coalitions of groups and stakeholders that maybe did not have aligned interests, but you know, really, you know, having that opportunity to have a seat at the table, you know, I think that in the end, when you're looking back at the last DCP with tribes, especially in Arizona, the Gila River Indian community, the Colorado River Indian tribes, you know, our significant water rights, you know, I think, you know, we really, you know, having a successful DCP could not have been really negotiated or really supported politically without us being at the table. And so, you know, so I think it's important once we start to look at, you know, these situations where these types of important policy decisions are made, including tribes early on in the process, I think that ensures a successful negotiation and an overall coming together of supporting these types of important water policy decisions.
Well, that's great to hear. And I'm just wondering if that model is being used in the development of some of the infrastructure priorities that you mentioned earlier. I know that, you know, those projects will require quite a few partnerships and collaboration, and certainly a lot of work among different groups. And just wondering if how that model has worked for that work.
Well, I mean, definitely. I think, you know, you look at some of the surrounding cities in Arizona, and of course the economies, whether it's agriculture or even development. You know, you look at the commonalities there. You look at ways where we can, you know, one of the things definitely that we looked at is creating those partnerships based on, you know, looking at storing water, storing other people's water as well, the whole water banking, that opportunity, including tribes and you know, intentionally created surplus, those types of opportunities as well. I think those open up new doors, new pathways for those types of partnerships as well. You know, tribes are just now really creating that internal capacity, you know, and I think for the Gila River Indian community, you know, we're really looking at how our water settlement, how those partnerships with other municipalities, other jurisdictions, really are, you know, create the path forward for some of these you know, important water making decisions when you look at the Colorado River really being overstressed, over allocated, and you know, so you go back to exactly what has worked and you build on that. And I think a lot of that has to do with trust as well, where tribes, especially the Gila River Indian community, where, you know, we see ourselves rightfully so as a sovereign nation, but, you know, from a holistic point of view, that goes back to our thinking, we're all connected by the water, and so you have to look at really large scale holistic types of approaches, you know, to water scarcity, to these pressing issues, especially during climate change, and so, you know, you really have to rely on that collaborative approach, you know, when you start to look at these really important decisions that we're making for our water.
Governor Lewis, thank you for your time and insights today and for your leadership on Western water issues. It has been an honor to have you join us at the Water in the West Symposium. Congratulations on your recent reelection.
Thank you. Thank you. It's an honor as well. Masapa, thank you very much. Have a great day.
Next, I'm honored to be joined by Nevada Lieutenant Governor Kate Marshall. Lieutenant Governor Marshall was sworn into office on January 7, 2019. In her role, she is a member of Governor Steve Sisolak's cabinet and serves as president of the Nevada State Senate. The lieutenant governor earned both her bachelor's degree and law degree from the University of California, Berkeley. After serving at the U.S. Department of Justice, she joined the Nevada Attorney General's office in 1997 and went on to be elected as Nevada State Treasurer for 2 terms. Lieutenant Governor Marshall also serves as the chair of the Nevada Commission on Tourism, vice chair of the State Board of Transportation, board member of the Governor's Office of Economic Development, and is a member of the Executive Budget Audit Committee. Lieutenant Governor Marshall, thank you for taking the time to speak with me today.
Thank you. I appreciate being invited.
Great. Well, what are some of the notable water policy initiatives that have recently been enacted in Nevada?
Well, you know, when you talk about water, you talk about the lack thereof. And so one of the things we think about when we think about water during this pandemic time is also how do we take advantage of the assets we have and then use those in a kind of smart, manageable way. So before we get into actual water policy, I'd like to talk about outdoor recreation. Because one of the things that Nevada did was, in the last legislative session, I helped facilitate the creation of an outdoor recreation agency. And in fact, the most popular forms of outdoor recreation are boating and fishing, right? And so one of the issues we've seen with outdoor recreation is that while it's very stable, so it's more resilient to recessions or pandemics, people are more willing to go outside. You don't want to love it to death. And so one of the issues that we've seen with respect to water is that, for example, many people went to Lake Tahoe to do boating, to do fishing, to do outdoor things, and that actually created a strain on the system. So the reason I bring that up here is because I know that Colorado sponsors this, and Colorado was our sponsor to join the confluence of states that have outdoor recreation agencies. And so I wanted to give a shout out to Colorado because they are wonderful to sponsor us. And when you talk about outdoor recreation, you're gonna have 4 pillars. You have the economics of it, conservation, health, which is very, very important as a health determinant, and then income, right? So I just wanted to bring that to the fore before we started talking about water, because it's something that Western states can use in this pandemic time. And I would encourage those Western states who don't have an outdoor recreation to call Colorado right away and get all their advice. Because it is a way to be resilient, to add resiliency to your economy, and to take the water resources you do have and enjoy them. So I kind of wanted to start off with that. I'm sorry to take you on a tangent, but I wanted to go there first.
No problem at all. Thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, so obviously in Nevada, we have some might call it the driest state in the nation. We just don't get a lot of rain. And so we really need to manage our water resources well. 85% of the land in Nevada is BLM, Bureau of Land Management land. And I would encourage all Western governors to look at how well BLM is managing the land and how much resources does a Western governor, does a particular state get from BLM. So you may look at and see that certain states are getting certain types of funding, and you may want to think about where your state fits in terms of that funding. So one of the things when we think about our public lands is how to make sure that we do have water. Nevada started in 2013, we started something called the Water Start program, which the state funded, and our Desert Research Institute facilitated, and it has now spun off into a nonprofit. And what that program does is it has members like a state utility, or a community utility like a mine, entities that use a lot of water. And then they co-fund pilots to come up with innovative strategies for thinking about how you're going to manage water. And the opportunity here is if you're a water utility, or if you're a water agency, or you're an entity that uses a lot of water in a particular community, you may not be able to take the risk of just implementing some technology, but you could fund a pilot of that so that then you can kind of see how it performs under different stress scenarios, and then you can facilitate its launch. So that's what WaterStart does. They've had about 31 different projects. They now have a collaboration with Australia. So state funds it, right? Then it spins off, it becomes this successful entrepreneur program in our state, which then we export these ideas to other communities and pull in and do those pilots here, and then also in Brisbane, Australia, so that we can test and and be the exporter of innovation, right? Which is what I think all states want to be in this kind of knowledge economy that we've got going.
That's really great to hear. Have other states looked at the Water Star program as a possible model for their water policy innovations?
Some of the members that we have are like Southern California's Water District, for example. So absolutely, other utility or water managers are definitely joining that. And I would encourage people to go to the website and see what kind of RFPs they have out there for different types of innovations that they're looking for people to pilot, because the water manager will join the pilot in its funding and then be able to provide the inputs that are particular to their needs. So that's one way. Another thing I wanted to bring up was Nevada has a water innovation campus. And this is an area where we're trying to figure out it's located in the College of Engineering. So we're trying to figure out, well, how do we provide engineering solutions for infrastructure issues that we have dealing with water, right? So one example, for example, that's been written about before is using sound to determine if you have leaks. The way you and I determine that is we look at our water bill and we say, no way, I didn't go to 3 showers a day. What's going on, right? And then you call the water company and you have them come out to see if the meter's running when you're just standing outside. But when you're the manager of a large utility, figuring out where, for example, where in Las Vegas some of those pipes might be leaking. That's a whole nother scale. And so we use this technology called hydrophones, where they are placed at certain locations to determine if they can hear leakage, right? So this innovation campus looks for solutions like that. And we actually, again, when you talk about water, I think about Nevada, but don't forget we have a whole world out there that is focused on water. And so we signed an MOU with Poland actually to again look at how do we take water that is non-potable and make it so that we can reuse it. Yeah. So
you've spoken to some very interesting innovations, and certainly Nevada's leadership in water policy and conservation issues is well documented. What are some of the water policies and initiatives that you feel have not yet been addressed either within the state or nationally and need some more attention or need to be prioritized at a state, regional, or national level?
Yeah, so communities like, especially in the West, communities like Phoenix or Vegas or Los Angeles, you really have to think about how do you reuse water and conserve water so that you have more water than you thought you had. So one of the things that we've done across those regions is we've actually been able to add to our water by conserving water. So, for example, Owens Valley, if you've ever seen the movie Chinatown, and if you haven't and you live in the West, then shame on you because you should. But Owens Valley, which is a place that used to be a lovely place filled with water and is now dry, there was a court order a while ago that said to LA that you need to put water back. So how does a growing population reduce its water usage at the same time, right? It's like between a rock and a hard spot, right? And so one of the things that we focus on, especially given that we are one of the states that draws from the Grand Canyon, is how do we continue to grow and still and at the same time reduce our water usage? And one of the ways that you do that is that you also obviously have rules and regs for building houses and how much lawn space you have and what type of water you put into those. But you also grandfather people in and you pay them not to have lawns. And you think about shade and you think about what kind of plantings you do. And that might be second nature to someone that lives in Las Vegas, but it should become second nature to people that live in the West in general. So those are some of the things.
That's a great point. And you've talked about a lot of efforts that really emphasize the importance of collaboration and partnerships. And I was just wondering if you could speak to that importance in of partnerships that Nevada has forged in these efforts with other states and tribal governments. You and the federal government as well, and other stakeholders. You had mentioned your efforts with outdoor rec, which is a great example. Can you speak more to that or to other contexts where partnerships have really played a central role?
Yeah, so one of the major things that Senator Harry Reid did when he was majority leader was he created a water agreement for Northern Nevada and Northern California, bringing together. One of the things that happens when, and I'll get to the outdoor rec in a second, but one of the things that happens is water doesn't obey your city lines, county lines, state lines, right? And you may have urban users, agricultural users, and tribal rights, right? And in the West, you may have people whose families have been there a long time and they have their own rights to water. So how do you get all these people together to think about solutions? And I might suggest to you that one way you get them together is by recognizing they have a common enemy. And that common enemy can sometimes be the government the federal government who's going to say, if you don't make a choice amongst yourselves, we will come in and solve this problem for you. And you might want to have input first. So that is often a way to bring people to the table to say, look, do you want to craft a solution that fits all our needs, or do you want someone else to come in from outside to provide those solutions for you? With respect to outdoor recreation, one of the things that we were so grateful for, to have this confluence of states, is that they could guide us in what was important in setting up our own outdoor recreation agency. So in other words, we didn't automatically, though I'm embarrassed because we should have, but we didn't automatically think, as your Lieutenant Governor says, Diana Primavera, all roads lead to health. We didn't automatically think about health determinants when we thought about creating an outdoor recreation agency, right? We didn't automatically think about the education of kids in inner cities and getting them to the outdoors and how important that is in terms of our education system when we thought of an outdoor recreation agency. And so having the confluence of states that can sponsor you and guide you. And then the other thing that happens is that as a business or as an entity, you know, when you're going to different states that they're coordinating, so you don't have to have 50 state plans. So all those things come into account. I think that when you're dealing with water, especially because it doesn't obey the little fences we build along our state lines, that it's important that we collaborate. It is a resource that we all have, and so we all need to manage it, right?
Lieutenant Governor Marshall, thank you so much for your time and insights today and for your leadership on Western water issues.
Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it. And I hope that you will all come to Nevada and enjoy our great outdoors, and make sure you have enough water when you do.
Great. Well, thank you again. And thank you to everyone that has joined us for this portion of the symposium. I'm now going to hand things over to Tim Motet, president of CSU Pueblo, to introduce the next part of the program.